You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
What's the one thing that can get an experienced police horse to abandon her post? Find out in this episode of Barn Stories.
Welcome to the Barn Stories podcast. I'm Lori Prinz, editor of Equus Magazine.
And I'm managing editor Christine Barakat.
This podcast features our favorite essays and articles published in Equus over the past 40 years. Although Equus is known for articles on horse care and veterinary research, our editorial mission has always been guided by the bond that exists between horses and people. And each issue has featured a real-life story that celebrates how horses enrich our lives and touch our hearts.
We've searched our archives, chosen the stories that resonated with our readers, and given them new life in this audio format. Longtime subscribers may recognize some of their favorite pieces. And if you're new to the Equus community, these stories will confirm that no matter what sort of saddle you sit in, a deep emotional connection to horses is something we all share.
We all know the phrase, an elephant never forgets, but you've probably never wondered if a horse would ever forget an elephant. Or maybe you have. In which case, you're in luck, because the essay in this episode will answer that very question.
The essay was written by a former mounted police officer in Toronto and recounts his first ride on a mare named Glenspey. She was an experienced patrol mare, well accustomed to the rhythms of the city. So much so that she'd stop at every red light along her route, patiently waiting for it to change to green. What Glenspey had no patience for, however, was a particular animal at the local zoo. And her predictably unpredictable method of dealing with their encounters made her a legend on the force.
Let's listen to Glenspey and the Elephant, written by Gary Leeson and read by Taylor Autumn.
After Bob Barker died last year, I read a story about how in 2013, the old icon of the game show business had paid a substantial sum, $880,000, to rescue 3 elephants from the Toronto Zoo and spirit them off to a sanctuary in California. That got me wondering, given how long elephants can live, I might well have encountered one of those elephants years ago. And it wasn't a pleasant experience. I was a policeman on the Metro Toronto Police Mounted Unit, a new man at the stable, when one day a more senior officer suggested that I take out one of the horses that needed some exercise. He looked at the other 2 officers present, and after some knowing glances back and forth, a consensus seemed to be reached. "Take old Glenspey," he said. "She hasn't been out for a few days. Oh, and take her down to Riverdale Park so you can give her a bit of a good run." "Sounds good to me," I replied as I gathered up my grooming kit and headed for the mare's stall. I got old Glenspey saddled up and led her out to the yard. Only as I swung up onto her back did I notice that all 3 men had come to the doorway to see me off, a gesture that seemed especially civil of them. "See you around 3 o'clock. One of them shouted as I guided the mare out to the street. He must be mistaken, I thought to myself. It was only 1:30, and my shift wasn't over till 4:30. I could see why Glenspey spent so much time standing in the stable. The old mare seemed devoid of energy or ambition, and I had to constantly bang away at her sides to get her to trudge along at a walk.
For first-time horse owners and new riders just starting out, finding the information and support you need can be challenging. That's why Equine Network has partnered with Sentinel Horsefeed and Absorbing to bring you My New Horse, a place where equestrians just getting into horse ownership or riding will find the resources and community they need at precisely their stage of the equine journey. From important horsekeeping information and how-to videos to social media communities, exclusive experiences, and more, My New Horse is your one-stop shop for riders of all levels and disciplines who are eager to find easy-to-understand horse care information and guidance. Start your horse ownership journey today. Visit mynewhorse.com.
It took about an hour to cover the short distance to the park. Every time she spied a traffic light about to change, she'd stop on her own, and it would take a heroic effort on my part to get her moving again. So that's what those buggers were up to, I thought to myself. They were having a little joke on me. When Glenspey and I finally reached Riverdale Park, we sidled downhill toward the center of the zoo, near the compounds that held the larger animals. A sizable crowd had gathered there, and I reined in the old horse, digging out my memo book to start making some entries. I'd only sat there for a few minutes when I began to feel some quivering through the saddle. The old horse had begun to shiver and was moving her weight from one foot to another. Suddenly, she threw her head up in the air and began listening expectantly, her ears rotating around like hairy radar antennas. She snorted loudly once or twice and was answered by a thunderous trumpeting call behind us. Glenspey and I swung our heads back at the same time and were startled by the sight of a huge elephant hurtling itself right toward us. Bugling loudly, the creature had a murderous look in his eyes as he charged, stiff-legged, toward us. His enormous trunk was coiled above his head, ready to slap down anything or anyone that got in his way. There was a fence between us, of course, but who knew if it could contain the giant pachyderm? The old mare was not going to wait to find out. She decided it was time to head home, and did not wait on me to agree. She sprinted away as I began to hold on for dear life. I had my hands full, but not with the reins. They were still drooped over Glenspey's withers. I held the pommel of the saddle in a death grip with one hand and clutched my memo book in the other. The old girl was on autopilot, steadily picking up speed as the crowd parted, and the peanut vendors and balloon salesmen began to dive for cover. As we exited the zoo grounds, I somehow managed to tuck my memo book into my belt and lean forward to catch hold of the reins. When we made it to the soft grass of the park, I hauled back as hard as I could and shouted, "Whoa, whoa," several times. But Glenspey motored on undeterred, snorting, farting, and launching divots of turf from her oversized hooves. She was still going full tilt as we left the park and hit Broadview Avenue. By now, I had the reins in both hands, but her path and pace still wasn't up for discussion. She thundered on, sparks flying as her shoes hit the pavement. "Whoa, horse, whoa, come on, horse, whoa," I shouted to no avail. There was one brief respite when the old girl saw a red light at an intersection and screeched to a halt. Even then, she fidgeted on the spot impatiently. When the light turned green, she again took the bit in her mouth, and off we went. We flew in the same fashion through several more intersections. The lights were green, and the pedestrians had the good sense to get out of the way. Finally, we approached the stable, with Glenspey maintaining a full canter until she slid to a stop directly in front of her aisleway. The constables I had left behind earlier were now nonchalantly leaning over the lower half of the Dutch doors. Smirking, one consulted his watch. 2:45. Believe that's a new record. With that, they all started laughing hysterically. They hadn't bothered to tell me that Glenspey and the elephant hated each other, and that whenever the elephant started trumpeting, the old mare would become so agitated that she would make a beeline for the stable, and nothing in God's world would stop her. Of course, I wasn't the first to be humbled by Glenspey, and I made sure I wasn't the last. Whenever we had all had enough of a new recruit's bravado, we decided that a little trip to the zoo was in order. So, was old Glenspey's nemesis one of the elephants that Bob Barker liberated all those years ago? I'm still researching that question, and I may never find out. But I, for one, would certainly like to think so.
Thanks for listening to Barn Stories. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have a favorite article or essay from the Equus archives that you'd like us to feature in a future podcast, let us know. You can reach us at equusbarnstories, all one word, @gmail.com. Did you enjoy this episode of Barn Stories? Head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. Thanks for listening. The Barn Stories podcast is a production of the Equine Podcast Network, an entity of the Equine Network.